Hello, this is Royce Kenny Brew. I am an educator and a DEI trainer for federal agencies. For 20 years, I've done observation programs, I've done staff trainings, I have done conferences, whether it's the Excel conference or the Blacks in Government conference as a facilitator. And I want to come and talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion by talking about these issues relating to race. You will see in the public sphere, in the political sphere, people using, manipulating, and abusing, if you will, the concept and idea surrounding race for gain. And I think it's important for us who want to understand this idea of race, the race matter, the race issue better, for us just to have a discussion. Now, I know that it is a danger for me to do so as a former political candidate and as a individual who may seek a political office in the future. It is extremely dangerous for me to talk about this issue because I'm posting this video to a public forum and it will be used in some manner, maybe even against me. But I think it is more important for me to take the sacrifice or take the chance of having this video to be used against me in some way to help resolve the race matter, the race issue, because as you see, it is one that really divides us even now. And so this particular DEI moment, I'll be talking about this question that you hear being posed to political candidates quite often, and it is America a racist country? Now, remember, I am a former ELA teacher, a former social studies teacher. So I look at questions as giving information as much as they are receiving information. And when I hear that question, I always think about several things that I was trained to think about as a teacher and also as an English major at the University of Iowa. Who is your audience and what's the goal of what you're about to say come out of your mouth? What's the goal? Now, first of all, I have to remind you or have you be aware of the fact that when you ask the question, you have to, first of all, estimate or guesstimate what are the people going to hear that you are talking to, your audience. Now, based on what your audience is, in my opinion, is the way that you should answer this question. Now, some people are not going to like that answer. Some people just go, answer the question to answer the question. Well, if the idea and the goal is to repair and to ease and to give some type of resolution to the race issues or race matters, then your answers on a subject like this, they have to be calculated and they have to be nuanced. So when I hear that question, is America a racist country? Some people want a yes or no answer. My first thought and my suggestion is, first of all, I don't think it's a yes or no question. If you're concerned about race matters, and if you're concerned about building allies who are non-minority people, if you answer that question, yes, then they're going to see or they're going to think that you're calling either them or people in general and everybody in America racist. And we know that's not the case. If you answer that question no, then minority people are going to be like, are you kidding me? That's not our experience. That's not what statistics say. And so if I was to be asked that question, if I was on the campaign trail or if I was in the classroom, I would answer the question like that. I would say, quote, that's not the right question to ask. Is America a racist country? And I would explain it. If we answer that question, yes, people who are not racist are going to think that you're calling them racist. And number two, people that are minority people in this country are going to think that you are crazy because America definitely has race problems. So the way to answer that question is to say that's the wrong question. That's the wrong way to phrase that question. What you should be asking is, does America have racist problems, a problem with racism, and how do you solve it? That's how I would answer that question. And then the next thing that I would say is that I would go through statistics. I would say, would you think that America had a racist problem when the Innocence Project has has exonerated more African American men for being falsely accused and convicted of a crime, so much so that several states had to put a moratorium on their death penalty, where a white man and a black man doing the same crime, the African American man, and they have the same type of record, gets more time and gets convicted and more time than that white individual? Do you think America has a race problem, knowing that 3 times as many African American women die in childbirth than white women? Do you think that there is a race problem in America when studies show that African American patients are given less pain medication by their doctors? Do you think there is a race problem in America when African American patients are having more amputees from diabetes, and whether it be a foot, whether it be a toe, and things of that nature, for virtually the same thing as white patients? And so you have to go through statistics. You have to go through and say, you don't think America has a race problem when a white individual with a high school diploma makes more money than a black individual with a college degree? You don't think America has a race problem when a study was done of an African American law brief, a white individual write a law brief, and the African American law brief was criticized more harshly? And then they'll say, well, they had different one could have been better and one could have been worse. And then you say to them, it was the same brief. The only thing that was different is that one had an African American sounding name and one had a European sounding name. And so you have to go through then research statistics. Then I also would quote a book by the name of Blind Spot, Hidden Bias of Good People, and talked about the impact of implicit bias and the work that the implicit association tests that has been done at implicit.harvard.edu at Harvard University, that talks about how 70% of people who have taken at this point thousands and thousands of these implicit association tests have 70% have negative bias against African Americans. And also that somewhere in the data that it talks about that anywhere between 30 to 35% of African American have negative bias against African Americans. And that bias is something that you don't see and that you don't know you have unless you are tested. And so the way to answer that question is not to indict someone. And if you say no, you're going to upset minority people. And that doesn't help to resolve the race question. So I would say that's the wrong question to ask. The question to ask is America have a race problem, and how do we solve it? And then you could go back into the history of whether it is redlining and its impact, whether it is federally backed mortgages given to white home buyers and not blacks that in many instances impacted white flight from urban areas like Detroit, Baltimore, Chicago, New York, Philadelphia. You can talk about all of these different statistics. You got to talk about history. You got to talk about statistics. Do you think America would be different if the Homestead Act had given land to African Americans too? So people always talk about entitlements, and they try to say that people of color were given these entitlements. Well, the Homestead Act gave millions of acres of land to white settlers and not to black people. The GI Bill was given benefits to white soldiers returning from World War II and virtually no African Americans. We're talking about like 3 African Americans out of thousands of white GIs to take advantage of the GI Bill. And those federally backed mortgages given to those homeowners to move out of those urban areas like Chicago, like Detroit, like Philadelphia, like Baltimore. And so you have to go into the statistics of how things are different. And that is the point about DEI. DEI is under attack because people don't understand what it is. So people are going to sacrifice and have to talk about race and these things, jeopardizing their future in industry and politics and what have you. And I'll do it because it's bigger than me. I have this video with Dr. King in the back and Baldwin in the back. These people sacrifice so I could be here doing what I'm doing. And so you have to have these discussions that are frank, that are important, that are substantive to talk about race. And so I don't have a problem with doing that. But when you talk about entitlements, entitlements have always been given usually to white men to the exclusion of women, to the exclusion of minority people. You could talk about the gender pay gap and explain the scale. That if you have a white male individual, that an Asian woman is going to make 83 cents compared to his dollar, that a white woman is going to make 78 cents compared to his dollar. Same industry, same credentials, that an African-American woman will be given around 64 cents to his dollar. A Latino woman, Latinx woman, Hispanic woman will be given about 54 cents to his dollar, and a Native woman will be given 48 cents to his dollar. And then ask the question, if America doesn't have a race problem, then how do you have those statistics with the same credentials? Not only is there a race problem, but there's also a gender problem. And so that's why DEI is important. And you have to explain to people that entitlements have always existed, but they just haven't existed for minority people and for women up until the last 60 years. For all of the time in this country's history, 400 years of history, 300 years of history, since people got to Jamestown, Virginia, and even earlier, there's always been some type of entitlement, but it just hasn't been for people of color and for women. And so that's how I would answer that question. Now, if you read a book called White Fragility by Dr. Robin DiAngelo, just having this discussion about race, some people are going to say I'm racist just by having a discussion about race. And I think it's important for us to understand that there is a continuum of discussion when you talk about race on what racism is. In the academy, people get PhDs and master's degrees to be able to study and read and learn and talk about race. And they talk about it in regards to policies that relate to power, that give rights to people that shouldn't have it and take away rights from people that should have it, that are people of color. That's what racism is. And there are some people, that's what the academy says that racism is. But then some people believe that talking about race is racism. And so when you see that long discussion of the different ways that people talk about racism, you can understand why people can then make up stories about, and I know I'm not going to even get political. I'm not going to say it. But when people are able to use racial undertones to make a political point, that is the reason why we have to talk about race, and we have to talk about it more frankly and more courageously. So this is Royce Kennebrew, your DEI trainer and specialist, an educator, an author. And this is your DEI moment, talking about the question on, is America a racist country? But it is up to you how you want to answer. I will leave it there. All right, we'll see you next time.